Now with us, former Pentagon official K.T. McFarland and former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Jed Babbin. Jed, if I could begin with you then. The president has also talked about this coalition of support for our being there and the good fight there, as he put it, 43 some odd nations strong. We are getting indications today out of Gordon Brown of Britain that they're going to commit more troops, maybe 500 more troops, bringing, I think, their presence in Afghanistan to 10,000. Nicolas Sarkozy of France is saying he's not going to add more troops, but unlike a lot of critics in France who wanted to draw down troops, he's going to keep them at around 3,500. Where is this large extra global support going to come from?
It's not going to come, Neil. And these NATO troops, if they come at all, which I doubt, are not going to fight. The problem we've had with NATO since this thing began is that the NATO troops remain in garrison and they don't fight. Look, this whole thing is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for every single soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman that's going to serve in Afghanistan. Neil, this is a strategy that is definitely going to fail. We know that right now.
Why? What's going to fail about it? What's wrong with it?
Well, let me just hit a couple of the high points. We're talking about a counterinsurgency strategy that's limited to 18 months. Neil, if you look back in history, in the entire history of the planet, successful counterinsurgency such as the Malay emergency, it's not 18 months, it's 18 years. We're going to start and then we're going to quit. And it's not going to work. He's talking about dismantling, disrupting, and disabling al-Qaeda and preventing them from coming back. How are you going to do that in Afghanistan? Al-Qaeda is a global movement. You're not going to do it, Neil, because you're not going to be able to prop up an Afghanistan government, and it's metaphysically impossible to prevent al-Qaeda from coming back. If you're going to be talking about 18 months here, and he's talking about having all of these things in the Taliban degraded, and building up the Afghan army. You can't do these things in 18 months. This is definitely a failure. It is going to be a tragedy. It is going to waste young American lives in a manner that I am frankly just shocked at.
I don't know whether Jed would like this, but he's in almost complete agreement with Dan Rather, with whom I chatted a little earlier today, but Jed has to chew on that.
That hurts.
But KT, one of the things that Dan Rather mentioned, much as Jed had just mentioned, and Dan's been back and forth to Afghanistan a number of times since actually dating back to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1980, that not only is it a perilous terrain, and not only is it just a country of nomads. In other words, there is, as much as we like to talk about this sort of central government, there is nothing of the kind there.
Yeah.
And that is what makes this a difficult mission. So talk about having the Afghans take control of this situation in essentially 3 years or less. Is that an aggressive timetable?
Yeah. I mean, I was in Afghanistan in May, and I want to reiterate what Dan Rather said. It is a no man's land. It is not an area that has any kind of central government. I mean, you know, Karzai is the mayor of Greater Kabul. He's not president of all of Afghanistan. And by looking at what President Obama has promised, I mean, it's another Obama speech. He promises everything to everybody, and then at the end he has stirring and inspirational words. I mean, let me just tell you what he says he's going to do in 18 months. Reverse the Taliban gains, defeat al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan, build an Afghan army, have agricultural products, secure population centers. He's going to do that in 18 months, and then he says he's going to get out. And oh, by the way, we're going to partner with Pakistan. I think what he's got to do is focus on a few things, like defeating al-Qaeda and having a pincer movement between the Afghan and Pakistan borders. And secondly, what he needs to do is focus on Pakistan, because Pakistan is where our strategic interests are because of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. You know, when you look around Afghanistan, there's nothing there of particular interest to us other than making it an al-Qaeda-free zone. Pakistan is where our interest lies. And so what Obama's talking about, I mean, you can call it whatever you want. It's really nation building. He's talking about doing a lot of nation building, but not in Pakistan. He's talking about doing it in Afghanistan. I think that the whole thing he's going too much, too fast, too soon. He's not going to get any of it accomplished. And I'd have to agree with Jed. This is a real disaster in the making.
But Jed, earlier today I talked to Lawrence Eagleburger, our former Secretary of State under the first President Bush. One of the things he raised with me was, look, Neil, we could add 100,000 troops there. This is the way we're structuring this isn't a winnable cause. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of what he said. What do you make of that even 100,000 troops wouldn't make the difference?
Well, I think that's quite likely true. I mean, in a counterinsurgency, you have to have something to build on. You don't have a unified society. You don't have a unified goal in Pakistan. You've got the Pashtuns and the Tajiks, and they don't agree on much of anything. They don't even want to live in peace with each other, far less form a national government. You don't have the advantage that you had in Iraq with the Sunni uprising and the Sunni triangle. You don't have people who are trying to throw out the Taliban. They're embracing the Taliban. So this is not a strategy that can work at all. And in 18 months, all we're going to do is we're going to waste a lot of young American lives. KT is right also that we're not paying enough attention to Pakistan, but moreover, Neil, moreover, what we're not doing, I did not hear the nation of India even mentioned tonight. And you cannot have you cannot have a solution in Southwest Asia unless we embrace totally the largest democracy in the world and protect it, and probably from Pakistan as well. This is a disaster of a strategy, Neil. It is a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare. I was going to call him Lyndon Baines Obama. I'm trying to think of some formulation of Barack Hussein Lear.
Jeez.
But I think it's
But KT, the president has said that this is not Vietnam. The analogies between Vietnam and now are night and day, and that those who jump to that conclusion do so falsely. What do you make of that?
Well, here's the problem. It is, to a certain extent, it is like Vietnam, because after Vietnam, what happened to the United States? We came back and we hunkered down and we withdrew from the world for a decade. Now, what happens if we try to do that now? If this doesn't work, if 18 months come and go and Obama brings the troops home, we haven't really, but our tail is between our knees, okay? So what are we going to do? If we try to hunker down for the next 10 years, it's not going to be a safe world. You know, the Vietnamese didn't come get us after we left. Al-Qaeda will come get us because they've already established footholds in Yemen and Somalia, the Horn of Africa. We know they're in Pakistan. We don't want them to return to Afghanistan. They're probably in Saudi Arabia, and they're worldwide. So to the extent that there is a similarity to Vietnam, I'm more worried that it's the post-Vietnam syndrome as opposed to the current Vietnam War syndrome that we seem to be talking about.
It's very interesting. Jen, let me ask you about if you don't mind me being so crass, the money issue here, since I'm the resident Fox geek. Let's say he finds a way to cover this cost. Is he telling the wealthier in this country, potentially at the behest of the Democratic leaders in Congress, and a couple of Republicans too, that, look, you want this war, you pay for this war? Well, what do you make of that approach? Because
it is,
not so subtly, that is what he is saying.
Well, and yeah, it's not subtle at all. I mean, it's as subtle as the rest of his policy, which is just very blatantly clear. I think it's something that he has not yet come to grips with, Neil. You have a situation where a war, by his definition, is not an open-ended commitment. That is only out of the mouths of the liberals. By definition, in history, a war is an open-ended commitment. You fight it until you win or you lose. And the cost is secondary. If he were serious, which he manifestly is not, about winning this war, because he has not even defined what victory really is, and he hasn't defined who the enemy really is.
By the way,
right now,
on that point, are you surprised he never said when we win this war? When he never used analogies like that?
He never uses the term win because he doesn't believe in victory. This is not a man, and he said it himself many times. He has said, I'm not all about this surrender on the deck of the Missouri business. Well, the point of the matter is, if you're going to drive al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan and expect them not to come back, you've got to defeat them comprehensively and globally. He's not about that. Getting back to the point on the money, the issue really here is, if you are going to fight a war, and how dare you fight a war and send a single young American in if you're not all in, and that means with money, and that means maybe we put off cap and tax, maybe we put off health care, maybe we use some of the stimulus money that's already not stimulating the economy and pay for some of this. This is not something that a reasonable person would reject out of hand, and that's what he is doing precisely.
And it's totally disingenuous. I mean, having spent all this money on stimulus and TARP and everything else, to then be quibbling about, you know, are you going to equip these men and women adequately and send them into harm's way? I mean, I think that's just, you know, it's reprehensible.
$30 billion. $30 billion. Neil, these guys spill this much. Well, $100 billion. These guys spill that much every month.
Right.
It's not a trillion. They don't even notice it anymore.
And then the other thing to think about is the total all-in money before you bought any of the agricultural products he's talking about is $100 billion, right? If we have ultimately 100,000 troops, $1 million a year per troop, you're talking about $100 billion. what can you do for that money? I mean, can you, instead of trying to kill every enemy you find, can you go and buy friends? Afghanistan's the kind of a country where it's a lot cheaper and more effective to buy friends than to kill enemies. And he's not talking about doing that.
All right. Guys, thank you both very much. You both have passed up your chance for a White House Christmas party invite, but I guess you don't care. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you, Neil.
Now, the other side of this, Representative Joe Sestak of Pennsylvania, a legitimate hero in his own right, a former U.S. Navy, 3-star admiral, 31 years. Congressman, very good to have you.
Thanks for having me back, Neil.
You've heard the concerns expressed